Hey everyone! So today I am here with Nicole and Mexie as usual, and this is part 2 of our 3-part series on the male gaze. And today we're discussing the pedophilic gaze, which I'm really, really excited about. And last time, part 1 was all about the male gaze, and next month, we're going to be talking about the queer gaze, the non-male gaze, a liberatory way of getting away from this toxic male gaze. And yeah, today, when it comes to the pedophilic gaze, first of all, just some disclaimers that we're probably going to be touching on sexual violence, child sexual abuse, assault, all of that. But we're not going to go into any specific details about any violations or events in particular. We're just going to be talking about the ways in which the gaze, pedophilic gaze manifests, and drawing on examples from the media and our personal lives as well. And also, I just wanted to say that sometimes when I talk about the paedophilic gaze, it sounds as if I'm shaming people, especially young girls or women, for doing these practices like shaving their vaginas and things like that. But it's not at all intended to shame anyone, because I do a lot of these practices myself, and it's just drawing attention to the ways in which it's really messed up that we're forced to do these things, but not shaming people for individually choosing to adhere to like the paedophilic script we're supposed to believe that we need to adhere to. And yeah, so for anyone who is wondering what we are referring to with the paedophilic gaze, Alison Gray coined the term pedophile culture, and that essentially refers to, in her words, pedophilia may seem taboo and despised by the masses, but an honest appraisal of our culture at large reveals otherwise. I propose that pedophilia is actually rewarded and celebrated, and that our entire culture and understanding of sexuality is constructed around what seems to be pedophilic desires. I call this pedophile culture. And so in our culture in general, we're always taught that pedophilia and any kind of attraction to minors is this pathology that a minority of society have, that it's completely biological, inevitable, and something that is just some sick individuals. And I think, or we think, that this framing is actually really, really harmful, because it kind of makes out that this is completely inevitable and there's nothing we can do about it, when we actually look at the way in which our culture operates, we are these desires are socially constructed, and we are taught to be attracted and taught to abuse people who are minors, and taught to fetishize younger people. So there is a lot that we can do about paedophilia, and a lot that we can do about dismantling this type of violence. And to treat it as if it's just inevitable and a few sick individuals, I think is incredibly harmful. And so yeah, that's part of the reason that we wanted to talk about this today. But yeah, Nicole, I think you wanted to jump in. Yeah, or...
Yes, and I just wanted to add in, I know Broe Deschanel just did a video recently about licorice pizza and talking about taboos and how they're represented in media and whether the media is condoning or condemning them. And she made it clear in that video the difference between pedophilia and what she called statutory age differences. So I want to bring that up because today some of the stuff we're going to be talking about maybe won't necessarily actually fit into a pedophilia category, but it is still part of this larger issue that we see with the male gaze, in that it fetishizes youth and young people, and as Kathrin said, the exploitation of minors or people who are of age but are still in a lot of ways kids, and the power dynamics between them and someone who's much older, who has more money and more life experience, is represented in this way that's very unhealthy. And this isn't to necessarily villainize relationships that have large age gaps. that can happen and be very healthy and be fine, but it's the culture around it and the way it's framed often that the teenager or the young person has as much agency as the adult, and that's just simply not the case. So that's part of what we'll talk about today. And I just wanted to make that clear that like everything about youth isn't necessarily pedophilia, but we do feel that it's all connected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to make it clear, the pedophilic gaze is a product of this pedophilic culture, and it's essentially the lens through which we in general, but men in particular, are taught to view women, and that lens is centered around pedophilic attractions. And yeah, it's not just with women, with young girls, with the type of things that we're taught to be attracted to in general. And yeah, so I think we're first going to go into the ways in which this paedophilic culture manifests, and then talk about some of the implications. And the first thing we want to talk about is the way in which femininity is constructed, and how that the construction of ideal femininity and ideal feminine beauty is centered around childlike features and adhering to just looking like a child, basically. So when it comes to bodies, femininity, trying to be as feminine or as beautiful as a woman as possible, is centered around having a prepubescent lack of body fat, being eternally youthful, petite, slender. Bodies are idealized. Doll-like features are sexualized, especially with big eyes, especially looking up at the men, really doe-eyed, and a lot of innocence is very much fetishized, naivety is fetishized, frail bodies is often fetishized. I remember I was with a man recently and just sort of saying something to him like, oh, I feel like you could break me with your body, you could break me, almost like I was trying to make myself more attractive to him by making it very clear how much power he had over me. And I felt like in that moment that was very much me trying to adhere to this kind of beauty standard of being weak and vulnerable and innocent, compared to this hyper masculine man. And grown women are often referred to as girls, babes, chicks, which is very much centered around childlike words. And there's also a hyper focus on children to adopt sexualized appearance and behavior a lot of the time. And maybe this is more controversial, but I feel like a lot of beauty is centered around trying to make us weaker and immobile and submissive, like high heels, for example. A lot of the clothing that we wear makes it so impossible to like run or do anything. It's so tight or so uncomfortable. And it reminds me a lot of foot binding in like Chinese culture, and how like feet would be kind of like toes would be twisted downwards. I don't know how to explain it, but so it was very, very difficult for them to walk. And it was like the weaker they appeared or the less able they were to walk, that meant that the more attractive they were, because I guess it was this submissive power dynamic thing. And I think like a lot of our beauty standards are very much centered around that as well. And when it comes to vaginas, I feel like we could make a whole video about vaginas.
We should.
Yeah, we're supposed to have completely hairless vaginas, to the point where I feel like what is considered to be attractive vagina is essentially like a baby vagina. It's like prepubescent. You're supposed to have completely tight vaginas, intact hymens. You're supposed to seem virginally pure. Labiaplasty is apparently one of the fastest growing surgeries of all time, which essentially tries to reduce the size of vaginal lips. And to have any labia showing at all is seen as unattractive. There are often people will ask you like, do you have an outie or an innie? And you're very much made to feel that if your vagina isn't like tucked away, that it's not attractive. And in general, there's this sort of titillating vulnerability of innocent girls whose bodies are uncorrupted by sexual experience. So you're supposed to constantly be as unknowledgeable about sex as possible, to have to the point where you're basically seeming like a child or acting like very young. And I have a quote by James Kincaid, I don't know how to say that name, in an article called Erotic Innocence, The Culture of Child Molesting. And he writes, we see children as, among other things, sweet, innocent, vacant, smooth-skinned, spontaneous, and mischievous. We construct the desirable as, among other things, sweet, innocent, vacant, smooth-skinned, spontaneous, and mischievous. There's more to how we see the child and how we construct what is sexually desirable, but not much more. To the extent that we learn to see the child and the erotic as coincident, we are in trouble. So are the children. And I thought that summarized it perfectly.
Yeah, that was really well said. Hey everyone, sorry that I'm just an avatar today. I've had a...
I thought you were just sitting very still in a very sexy pose. Like,
yeah,
who's Mexie looking at?
You.
Sorry, I jumped straight into the topic. I forgot to ask you how you
No worries. I just wanted to address the fact that I'm an avatar today. My health has taken a turn as per usual, so here we are. But I'm still really excited to have this conversation. But yeah, thank you for bringing all of that up, Kathrin. I completely agree, and I think the pressure to perform femininity in that way is just so huge growing up. Like how much money and how much pain did I endure, waxing my vagina? I just would not ever want to, be seen by a man, not having a completely, shaved and waxed vagina and all the rest of the parts of my body as well. But it's you're supposed to also you're not supposed to have any trace that there was ever hair there at all, right? Because when you do that, even when you wax, and I mean, it's going to grow in, obviously, and a lot of times you'll have ingrown hairs, and for me, that's definitely something that I struggled with. And then it's even more horrifying because then you don't want them to see your vagina at all, because not only is it supposed to be shaven, it's supposed to you're not supposed to have any indication that there was ever hair there at all. And so eventually, having struggled with the ingrown hair thing and those other complications, are just the pain of having it grow in and then having the rubbing and whatever, it just causes a lot of irritation. I ended up getting laser hair removal, and so it's gone now. And I know my current partner is oh, I wish I could have seen you with the pubes or whatever. And I'm well, it's gone forever. And I don't necessarily regret it, but yeah, I just think the pressure of that is so incredibly high, and there's so many kind of really weird ways that we are trained as well as young women to perform that kind of weakness, as you said, Kathrin, that you're kind of performing that with that person. And just this kind of, childlike innocence. I think about the ways in which schoolgirls were always so sexualized, as a teenager. And so the girls who went to the Catholic school with the plaid skirts and whatever, because I just went to a public school, so we could just wear whatever we wanted to. But, those uniforms being so sexualized, and people, me and my friends at the public school wanting to go get these schoolgirl uniforms to hike our skirts up and sexualize ourselves, because that was such a pornified kind of trope. And you realize, you just think about obviously, somebody brought up how men, young boys undergo circumcision, and how and obviously there's a lot of things that we could talk about in terms of what young boys go through as well. But I just think in terms of the sexualization and kind of the pedophilic male gaze, it really seems to go mostly in one direction. There is no equivalent of the sexy schoolboy and the sexy schoolboy uniform that men are supposed to be, conforming to. It really is I don't know. Yeah, I feel like the gaze is really, I guess, really gendered in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And someone in the chat brought up like Asian girls talk all cute and wear young girl clothes. And I think that reminded me of the ways in which porn often really manufactures these desires as well, because like cute little Asians is a very racialized trope, and definitely there's a lot of like ways in which this manifests differently depending on races. And so yeah, there's within porn there's all these racist stereotypes about featuring young Asian women dressed as little girls in uniform, with their hair tied up. And yeah, I think that it's just really disturbing in a lot of ways. And the majority of porn in general, like the most popular topics are often barely legal, daddy-daughter, virgin manipulations, incest fantasies. Teen was the most popular category for many years in a row. Girls in schoolgirl outfits, as Mexie mentioned, teacher student. There's so many pedophilic tastes that are catered to on these platforms, and that are actually, these attractions are manufactured because obviously the algorithm works so that when you go on it, what you see becomes more and more extreme constantly. And so you may start off with something pretty innocuous, and then slowly the algorithm is getting you more and more to these more and more taboo things, and then you slowly learn to find that really hot and attractive. And the vast majority of porn depicts men degrading and abusing women and girls. And there's also like a lot of the scandals that have happened recently with porn in general, about the underage people that have been found to be on places like Pornhub. And yeah, it just goes to show just how much of this is like perpetuated through porn culture in general.
Yeah, and then it's really insidious, right? Like when you're talking about the way that fetishization can happen in a really racialized way, and then I'm thinking about, you know, like the attacks on Asian women in America, and like the Atlanta shooting and things like that, and just how violent like that kind of fetishization and objectification can be, and like how damaging these tropes are, I think, in general. But yeah,
and then how that feeds into the international sex trade as well, with a lot of richer Western people, white Western men, going over to countries like Thailand and purchasing sex workers. And a lot of the time these people would be underage, or they don't have regulations to measure whether someone is underage or not, and how that then like feeds into just international oppression. And so the desires that are constructed on porn then manifest into real life actual violence against women abroad or girls abroad. I wanted to go on to discussing examples in media specifically. I don't know if either of you had anything else to add, or if I should just
I think we can go into that, and then I'll jump in at some point.
Okay. So there are just so many examples in media in general. I was just thinking about the naked cherubs have always disturbed me so much in churches in general. I'm just so disturbed. Why are there naked babies everywhere? And then also beauty pageants is a thing that I just, of children. It's very strange. Anime, the sexualization of animated girl bodies. Bratz and Barbies. I don't know if anyone remembers Bratz, but they were like these hypersexualized little dolls. And that definitely fed into me and my friends wanting to sexualize ourselves, wanting to like have the bodies that the brats did and wear this type of stuff that they did and have like a Barbie like doll, and like it immediately fed into this socialization that as women we needed to be objects for male desire, and that the most important thing about us was our appearance, because that was all that the Barbies and the brats ever represented. And yeah, then I think Pop Culture Detective made an absolutely amazing video called Born Sexy Yesterday, and it's essentially the Born Sexy Yesterday is a trope that refers to the ways in which characters a lot of the time in sci-fi have the mind of children but in mature sexualized women's bodies. And they gave several examples, but one of them was from Star Trek, and the ways in which, like, basically it will be someone who's essentially a child who knows absolutely nothing about the world, and they are put into this super attractive woman's body, and then the man hero is there to, like, is their first ever love and teaches them the way of the world and whatever. And it's basically hypersexualizing someone who's naive and basically a child in every single way other than their bodies. And yeah, it just really reinforces this attraction to the vulnerable, the weak, the attraction to men being able to make themselves feel masculine in relation to a woman being a subordinate, I guess. And Britney Spears, the ways in which she was hypersexualized from such a young age as well, when she was underage, and the way she was asked to pose in photos and videos and all of that was just incredibly disturbing. And I think Lolita is also an interesting example, because Lolita is just a really good example of how normalized and trivialized sexual abuse of children was, and the victim blaming mentality there is around child sexual abuse. And basically, for anyone who isn't aware, the Lolita film essentially presented Lolita as if she was some sort of seductress of the man, instead of the man being seen as a pedophile, as being seen as violent and evil. It was seen that Lolita, as the child, had like lured him in, and she was like hypersexualizing herself, and it kind of made it out to be as if it was completely consensual or like an inevitable that he would become attracted to her because she just made herself so sexy. Like, how could he resist? And it definitely fed into this victim blaming mentality towards a child. And I think when it came to R. Kelly, we saw like a very similar kind of phenomenon happening, because he groomed and abused, I don't know how to say her name, but Aaliyah. Aaliyah, okay.
She's an icon. You should listen to her music. She's amazing.
Okay.
I was devastated when she died. Oh God, it's really good.
Yeah,
it's really good.
Okay. But yeah, she was basically groomed and abused in plain sight when she was like 13, 14 years old. She and R. Kelly got married when they were like 50, when she was 15, and they actually made a song called Age Ain't Nothing But a Number. And
I think about that all the time. It's like that song came out when I was, I don't know, a tween or a teen or something, and just I think about that as an adult all the time now, that was a song that they publicly released, and that like kids like me were singing along to and being like, yeah, this is so romantic, you know?
It reminds me of in the Leaving Netherlands I think it was in that documentary about Michael Jackson, an expert on this kind of violence made an interesting point about how oftentimes people who do this kind of violence will make it explicitly clear that they're doing it, like through the lyrics of their songs, and he gave examples about like Michael Jackson in some of his songs, but also with R. Kelly, like Bump and Grind, and I don't know much about his music, but yeah, Age Ain't Nothing But a Number. It's just really interesting how a lot of the time, like, they'll make it so explicitly clear that it's happening, to the point where then as a result we it seems so inevitable that we then don't do anything about it, but like it's like a deliberate strategy. I don't know, but
yeah. And I think with R. Kelly, I mean, it's really important to point out that this is definitely like racialized heavily as well, because I think most, if not all of his victims are Black girls. And I think that was a big part of why he was allowed to get away with stuff that like was very well known and very obvious and not hidden at all, is because we as a culture tend to age up Black girls and see them as older and like having more agency than they actually have, which then allows people to dismiss the violence that's happening to them as part of, you know, the ongoing system of racism that we have. And I think, you know, I'm glad you brought up R. Kelly, because I think it is a really good example of this kind of thing where this was happening in the public eye. It was not hidden. I mean, some stuff was hidden, but for the most part, everything was there out in the open and just nobody really did anything. And he was allowed to become, you know, rich and powerful and famous, even doing this stuff out in the open.
Yeah, and Aaliyah became ridiculed. Sorry, Aaliyah became ridiculed in the media, and like because of this whole like scandal with R. Kelly was then like, oh yes, she's a seductress. She was like victim blamed, when R. Kelly, he only like rose more and more in his like fame and in his the money that he got. And it's just such a good example of where a lot of the times when these kind of scandals happen, or basically when older men sexually abuse children, they end up like getting all the sympathy and getting more power or more support or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas the young girls who are the victims become blamed, ridiculed, shamed, and then
And we like to give perspective. Aaliyah was like a Beyonce. Like she was on her way to being, she was like this groundbreaking icon. She's incredibly talented. She started to get into acting. Like she was amazing. So for her career to take a hit because of this just shows the like it would be sad and it would matter no matter what. But we're talking about someone who like, with the right support and left unimpeded, would have been like this worldwide, I believe in my heart, if she had lived long enough and had the right support, like would have been an icon, like a diva, you know? And yeah, and this like tainted her reputation. And she was just a kid. And she was a famous kid. So you can imagine what he was doing to girls who didn't have, you know, any kind of public attention on them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in the R. Kelly documentary, someone made an interesting point about like, if this had been happening to white girls, then there would have been media outrage and he would have been prosecuted long ago. But because this was happening mostly to Black girls, then yeah, like no one cared, basically. Yeah, and I read an article that made an interesting point about that the reasons why people have these kind of responses is because it's easier, like men find it easier to victim blame people like Lolita, because they secretly sexualize her themselves. And then I was thinking also that women find it easier to victim blame because we're often sexually attracted to these kind of men that are abusive, because we get taught to become attracted to that which is harming us, and it's often like just a trauma response. And so it's easier for us to like victim blame as well, because we kind of have the same like attractions to the people that are abusing us. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. I think it's also a matter of this creates a dynamic where older women see girls and young women as competition rather than someone to be protected.
That's
And
so
that
true.
happens a lot. Like that even happened to me with my own mom. Once I hit high school, it like I could feel the shift in our dynamic where she started to compare us rather than feel like my mom, you know, who's like, I'm a kid and she's the parent. It started to feel like we were peers.
Mhm.
And it was like very confusing to me and very upsetting. Like she started to police my body and compare like our bodies and stuff like that. And it was a really shocking exposure to the fact that, like, I think, you know, as women, speaking kind of broadly, we are trained to see each other as competition. And you can see that sometimes women start seeing their daughters as competition, like from when they're born, you know?
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think about a lot of media that also portrays that trope. Like I'm thinking of White Oleander and it was Precious even. Like just these films and these books and things like that that portray that exactly where the story will be that you know, there's a couple and maybe it's like the stepdaughter or whatever ends up in a relationship with the man and then the mom is like hating on the daughter because of that dynamic instead of being like, wow, this is so fucked up, you know? But I think it's also gross that that kind of story is normalized to us through media, right? Because I think that it's like, you know, it's depicting in a certain sense what's going on and what's kind of wrong with our pedophilic culture, but it's also kind of perpetuating it. Like it's putting in our minds that that's kind of a normal thing.
Yeah.
And just like
And to me, it does seem to enhance pedophilic culture because whenever I see media like that, it tends to make the older woman look kind of pathetic or
yes.
bitter,
Yeah.
right? So it's like confirming that like older women are just these like bitter, ruined, you know, nasty kind of people. And like you always have to go get someone younger because then they're fresh and they're sweet and they're going to look up to you and they're not going to be a lot of trouble and they're always going to be happy. Like that's my biggest issue with men who tend to date younger women is not so much the age difference in and of itself, but when you talk to them or when you hear them talk about their relationships, that's what they always say is like, oh, I just like younger women because they're just so happy and they're just like tend to like me for who I am and not have any like problems with me and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, so you're saying like they don't have any boundaries, they don't have a sense of self, you know, they don't have like needs that are blocking your desires, right? They're just kind of open for whatever you want to do. And that's not a relationship. That's like abuse, you know, or that's a dysfunctional dynamic, if nothing else. And then you get the representations of older women as like the opposite of that, right? So bitter, demanding, can't be pleased, whatever. And it makes them seem like all older women are just like horrible to date or to be with, as if like a lot of us don't just chill out and become actually much more cool and like easy to be around. I know that's for me, I'm like so much more chill and relaxed than I used to be when I was younger and way more insecure. But anyway, yeah, I think it's a dynamic that kind of like enhances both because it is confirming that like there's like younger women are superior to older women.
Yeah, and it also reminds me that the kind of trope that men will just not want to be socialized to not want a woman that is any way challenging them in any way, so they're then attracted to the younger girl who's like just going to go along with what they say and make them feel intelligent and make them feel like that they're in the right with whatever they want and go along with everything. And it's kind of that idea that masculinity is constructed around needing to feel superior all the time and needing to have domination over, and like as soon as like women as they get older tend to, well, I don't know if I can generalize, but you know, a lot of the time they'll have more ability to challenge and have less of that kind of like I don't know, just going along with whatever is being said kind of mentality. And yeah, I think like a patriarchy teaches us not to become, teaches men not to find that attractive.
Yeah, and I will say, as you know, we reach greater equality of oppression, I'm seeing this gaze put on younger men as well with older women. I think there's a lot of stuff out there now catering to women, like middle-aged women, as particularly white, rich, middle-aged women. And a lot of it, when it centers around women who date younger men, the dynamic is very similar, where the younger men are being used for their bodies, for their looks, for the fact that they're like very virile and have lots of energy, but they're not being treated like equal partners. They're not being treated like full human beings. They're being very heavily objectified, and these aspects of them that are young are being fetishized in that dynamic. So I do want to say, like, all of this can apply to, because I know someone's bringing up a bunch of shit in chat, all of this can apply to gay media, gay porn, gay relationships, and it also can apply to male-female relationships where the woman is the older person with more power. But it doesn't mean it's not still part of the male gaze, and it's not still coming from the same place. Like, patriarchy is a system of domination.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, you know, gay men are not immune to the patriarchy. It's still coming, like, gay porn is made from the male gaze. Just because it's gay doesn't mean it's not still catering to the male gaze and to these power dynamics. So I would say that, yes, that's correct. Like, these other forms of media that have maybe different genders involved or different sexualities involved are still affected by this male gaze and this pedophilic gaze and this culture that we live in that fetishizes youth in that way.
Yeah, that's really well said. Yeah, because it's all exactly like you said, like it's all coming from that same like patriarchal gaze of domination. And so I would say either way, it's problematic, right? But this person's bringing up a lot of stuff about porn, which I feel like maybe we should do a whole other episode on that. But I guess I would kind of disagree with some of their points. But anyway, we can just move on.
Yeah. And I also think that, sorry if this is repeating what you just said, but I was just thinking when it comes to like the ways in which homophobia feeds into this sort of thing as well, because because of homophobia, gay men in particular are often taught that they can't access their attraction to men without there needing to be a dominating, violent aspect to it, because they're taught to they're taught that that's the only way that they can access their sexuality. And yeah, I think so. Yeah, it doesn't just impact young girls, it impacts like all different types of people. And I was also thinking a lot about the ways in which a lot of the time, because of the patriarchy, there's this image of the male savior, daddy protector trope as well. And so even when someone is like seeming to be non-patriarchal or seeming to be a nice guy or whatever, they often just perpetuate this idea of like becoming sexually attracted to the fact that you are like weak or in a vulnerable position, or like you need help. Like I remember I had a really like disturbing experience, what I felt was disturbing experience when I first came out about my sexual violence. And then like I went to a house of a friend, and their dad was like holding my hand and like being really creepy, and I was like, what are you doing? And I really felt like he was kind of sexualizing the fact that I was like a vulnerable assault survivor and that needed to like protection by this big daddy man. And then he was like going on about like how he always knew this because he knew me since I was very young. He had turning to his wife like, oh, didn't I tell you? I always knew this. Like really becoming like feeling his masculinity was being reaffirmed by this kind of like daddy savior trope. So I feel like a lot of the time it can also manifest in like just I've always wondered this with the Me Too movement as well, because there was something that I often became quite disturbed by with some of the Me Too people talking about their experiences. And it's not to shame the people who were talking about their experiences, but sometimes I felt like it became a bit like voyeuristic, or like this spectacle of watching all these women mostly talking about their sexual violence in a way that was then like titillating to the viewer, or like I don't know, I just felt like a lot of people were very much sexualizing this experience because you can have your masculinity affirmed by feeling like you can be the hero that steps in and saves this poor little damsel in distress.
Yeah, and it gives them a way to infantilize us or re-infantilize us by seeing us as victims that they can come in and nurture and heal. So it creates this like secondary childhood almost, where it's like, oh, now that I know what happened to you, like I can put you back in that place of being like a helpless little child and then treat you that way. But also I want to fuck you. And it's like, that's really confusing. I just shout out to my podcast, Red Shirt Collective, if anyone wants to listen to it. But this is actually relevant because we just did episode 2, in which one of the main characters, Tasha Yar, who's a security officer, her whole backstory is simply that she grew up on a planet that had rape gangs and was like repeatedly raped throughout her life. And like that's all you know about her. That's like her defining characteristic. So they have this episode where everyone gets drunk. It's a long story, but everyone's like trying to fuck each other. And she gets very hypersexualized and very objectified in this episode. And she talks about how she wants to have gentleness and love and joy by having sex with another crew member, which in and of itself could actually be a beautiful moment as a survivor to be like, I'm reclaiming my sexual agency. But it was just so clearly used by the writers to like fetishize her background and her and use this as a way, because she's like a security officer, she's like a modern girl boss, she's like this character that's supposed to represent feminism. And it's almost like they have her have this backstory so that they can, when they want to, sexualize and like infantilize her and make her like soft and accessible to the male audience. And I just find that happens so many times that I read about, like a character has a survivor storyline and it's just used to help a man feel a certain way within the story, whether as a protector or feeling like he's such a great guy because he doesn't care, or that he overcomes his, feelings about what happened to her. It's hardly ever centered on like the victim themselves. And really more like what it helps the men around the victim feel about themselves.
Yeah, that reminds me of that. What is that movie? Is it Taken or something?
Oh God.
That series of movies.
All 15 of them.
Yeah.
Oh God. Isn't that, I don't know if that's the right name, but the one where like his daughter gets kidnapped or something. But like everyone sexualizes that man and like what a hero, what an incredible. And yeah, I think it's such a good example of like it's not anything to do with the victims. It's like about look at this amazing.
His daughter's the one going through these like horrendous things, and we get to focus on him, and what a daddy he is.
Oh my God, it's so disturbing. Yeah. And I also think that in general, I feel like patriarchy teaches men to be incredibly insecure about their penises and about their sexual abilities. And as a result, men become very threatened by sexually liberated women, or like promiscuous, I hate that word, but people who are more have more sex basically. And I think that inherently,
or who are even just full-sized, like that's why men sexualize so much children and also like very small women, because it's like they think, oh, proportionately I'm going to be doing pretty good here, and it's like that's not necessarily how it works, first of all, and second of all, gross.
Yeah. And this reminds me of this man who once said to me that like, yeah, I prefer like vaginas that are like more tucked away, because the more like the more labia there is, the more sex that they've had. And I'm like, what? No, that's not how it works. Like, you don't.
If that was true, I would have to like roll mine up, and I'd have to have like a cart behind me to carry them. Give me a break. But that's what I mean, is that there's this idea that our bodies actually communicate like our experience and how we're going to receive things, and it's just simply not true. Like, you can have sex for the first time and know that it was shit, you know, like you can have sex for the millionth time and have it feel like the first time. Like, there's just no. And I do think men are conditioned to feel really insecure about their bodies as well. That's very legit and valid. But it's the fact that it then gets taken out on those of us who sleep with them, as then, like, instead of dealing with their own issues, our bodies have to accommodate and make up for that. And this is where we get fetishizing virgins and young people. Like, I had a friend, we were at happy hour once. I may have told this story before, but we were talking about our favorite like sexual partner that we ever had, and he said that his favorite time was with this girl because she was a virgin. And I was like, so, but like, what about it was so great? And he's like, oh, just that I knew that like she didn't have anything to compare it to, so I was like the best she ever had. And I was showing her how it works, and I was like, this is the grossest thing I've ever heard.
That's actually just like, are you not embarrassed to say that? Like you're actually just telling on yourself. Like, I liked it so much because she couldn't compare me to anyone else. So in her mind, I was the best she ever had. Like, that's pathetic.
I know. He was saying it to a group of women too, and we were all like, like looking at him over our drinks, like, gross, dude. But it also shows like the fact that he was able to say it and be like like he did not have any awareness that this was a pathetic or bad thing to say, just shows you like how indoctrinated most guys are. Because if he had said that to a group of guys, they probably have been like, yeah, man, right on, you know?
Yeah, bud.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've slept with men that will say things like, "Oh, I'm gonna open you up," like stuff like that. Like you're this, I don't know, tight thing that like through their penetration they're gonna like I don't know.
Yep,
I don't even. I can't. Yeah. But yeah, as you said, Nicole, I do definitely have sympathy for the fact that like constructing masculinity in this way is really toxic for men. Like, it's sad that so many men have to feel insecure about their bodies, about their sexual abilities, about their penis size, and these types of things. So yeah, I definitely do have empathy for that. Yeah, and what else did I want to mention about this? I feel like Euphoria, we could definitely talk about that.
You could do like a 3-part series on Euphoria alone.
Yeah, please go ahead, Nicole.
So something I wanted to bring up, and I feel like Euphoria is a good place to kind of do that, is I also wanted to bring, so the weird thing about the pedophilic gaze and youth fetishization is that it does both. Like, it ages up young people and gives them a sense of sexual agency and like awareness and knowledge that they don't have. So that's like the Lolita trope, right? Is that she's a child, but she's portrayed in this way as if she knows what she's doing, and it's actually the older man who's like victim to her advances. And then it also does this thing where they'll cast actors who are older than the ages of the people they're playing. Maybe it's not the opposite, maybe it's part of the same, but it gives this skewed idea of what like a 15-year-old would actually look like, or a 16-year-old would actually look like, or how people in high school actually behave. Because certainly teenagers have sexual agency, certainly, you know, a lot of them are having sex, but a lot of them are also not having sex. And I feel like these shows that focus on high school students and are cast with like 25-plus-year-olds who are playing these teenagers, is they make everything hyper sexualized, and the children are always written as if they have a lot of life experience, as well as the fact that they're sexually active. And one other thing I want to add into this like analysis that I think that ties into euphoria is we talked in previous episodes about how the like breasts, for instance, were sexualized, and that was a part of colonization. And what I came to realize as we were preparing for this live stream is that sexualizing breasts and body parts and certain aesthetics also ages children up who happen to develop early. And I know this happened to me. So I, hit puberty when I was 11. And by the time I was like 13, I had, double D cup breasts and like was very curvy. I had like a very hourglass figure. And, but I still feel like if someone looked at me, they could tell that I was a child. And, it didn't matter because because of the way that we've sexualized things like breasts, we equate them to maturity and sexual availability. And so men started to see me as a peer or someone who is sexually available to them. And I would I would get hit on like at the grocery store or at like the movie store or something. And I'm like a kid, and I'd have 40-year-old men walking up to me and being like, oh, have you seen this movie? What did you think about it? And I'm like, I'm a child. Leave me alone.
Yeah. I relate so much.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. I miss my curvy babe. And it just is something I think I wanted to bring up. And I think we're seeing that now with muscles and height on boys. Same thing, like we're seeing a lot of stuff where teenage boys are being shown with their shirts off and they're super ripped. And it's like, why would a 16-year-old need to be that ripped? Like, you're a kid. Like, why are you spending that much time in the gym in the first place? Just go live your life, child. But it functions primarily the same way to show that they're a sex object and not a kid, and it's fine for like sometimes young people are attractive. That happens. And it's not wrong necessarily to acknowledge that like someone is an attractive person or is pretty or whatever. But there's a difference between that and the way that we look at someone's body and then determine like their sexual availability to adults.
Yeah, that's so well said. Yeah, I definitely relate. Like I also had like a D cup in grade 7, and I feel like I also was highly sexualized and treated like I was more mature than I was. And even at that age, like I knew that like I felt like I was trained to play into that as well. And I started to see myself as just basically like walking tits, or like I learned that like that's basically my main point of attraction and interaction with other people in the world. But yeah, I think those were really, really great points. And I haven't actually seen the show Euphoria, but I guess ever since the last episode, I've been seeing so much, like so many TikToks and things like that. And people just, I guess furious about how particular characters are sexualized, especially Cassie. I don't watch the show, but yeah, it made me kind of feel great because I was like, okay, well, the youth are not having it. Like the youth are like, no, we're not here for the over sexualization of, women first of all, but then also this weird, like it's not pedophilic, like you said, Nick, when you were explaining the difference between pedophilia and like the statutory, rape or statutory issues. But yeah, to have like 30-year-olds playing teenagers and then to have such an explicit show, like it does not need to be that explicit, or like, these girls that are playing teenagers don't need to be sexualized. And as you said, I think you said that, boys as well, like they were showing dick, which was like a good thing in terms of like pushing back against the male gaze. But at the same time, pretty problematic. It's just not really like, how is that necessary? It's like, I feel like you can make things to be really sexy and show that, kids are together and have really developed plots without having it be like, there's just, what is the purpose of it? Right.
Well,
like
we don't need to see kids fuck.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a hot take.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm breaking the internet right now, but like, I don't think we need to portray teenagers as if they're not having sex. And I think when you say, like, we don't need to see kids fuck, that's what people hear is like, oh, you're trying to, you know, preach abstinence to teens or whatever. And it's like, no, I know that kids fuck. I think kids should have the ability to explore their sexuality. And I think they should have media that helps them do that. But adults don't need to see kids fucking.
Yeah.
We can allude to things happening, or we can show certain situations without showing like penetration, you know, like they're not showing penetration, but like they're everything but, you know.
Yeah, like what is the point of that?
Humanly can. Yeah. So I don't need to see whether the actress is actually underage or not. I don't need to see her tits. I don't need to see her getting fucked. I don't need to see this stuff as an adult. I don't need to see this in a child. But you can still tell stories about, you know, you can still tell realistic stories, or someone can tell their own story through media, and that's fine. It's just not something that like adults need to be watching for titillation and entertainment.
Yeah, and I think it's also really messed up how the characters Maddie and also Kate were portrayed, because Kate was the sex worker, and I felt as if it was really kind of romanticized or seen as quite a cool phenomenon that that she was doing sex work. But I mean, like, she was a minor doing sex work, like that should not be seen in such like a lighthearted way. And then with Maddie, there was this line where it was like, she lost her virginity when she was 14 to a man who was like 40, but she was the one who was really in control. And I'm like, excuse me, how can a 14-year-old be in control? And that's again just like perpetuating this idea that like, oh, but young women, these like hot young women with their seductressness, they're the ones that like are luring them in, they're the ones that are in control. Like, no, I'm sorry, but a 14-year-old, a child cannot be in control and like in a situation where there's that much of a power dynamic and age difference. And yeah, and I think this phenomenon of adults playing child characters is really problematic, because it adds in this mechanism of disavowal in a lot of ways, where lots of people can say, yeah, like, oh, I'm sexualizing these child characters, but they're not really children, so it's fine. But it's like, yeah, they might not be played by children, but they're still representing children. So like to sexualize them is like not okay. And it's just perpetuating this like pedophilic culture that normalizes and trivializes this kind of sexualization. And yeah, it's disturbing, I think.
Yeah. And like bringing it back to our male gaze thing, I actually posted on our community tab, it's our only community post, was a TikTok where this person was explaining that Sydney Sweeney, who plays Cassie, actually regrets a number of her nude scenes. And she actually, apparently there was going to be even more of them, but she asked for some of them to be removed, and they were, but that she generally regretted a lot of her nude scenes and the way that she was portrayed. But as somebody who's trying to make a name for herself, like, you know, comparing her and Zendaya, you know, Zendaya never had to do a nude scene, like never had to show herself in that way. And it's because she's a far more established actress and she has a whole team behind her who can advocate for her or whatever. So she had more bargaining power. So it just really goes back to what we were talking about in the male gaze, about how these decisions are so often being made by male producers and directors, and, you know, young women who are trying to get their careers off the ground often feel like they need to do these things, and often they do, right? You know, the pressure is real. And yeah, I just, like you said, Nick, like, we don't need to see that. There's actually, it doesn't add anything to the story to have that kind of explicitness, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, tying in the pedophilic gaze to all of this is how many child actors are forced to have their first kiss on screen, or to be sexualized in scenes and have dialogue that they may not even fully understand what they're saying as part of their job. And the way that we normalize actors having to do whatever they're told. I don't know if you two saw this, but there was a big blow up after, I think the last season of Stranger Things, because they had these roundtable discussions, like a special, where they had the showrunners sitting down with some of the kids, the actors, and they would just talk about whatever. And in one of them, I can't remember the girl's name. I don't remember her character or her actor name, but the redheaded girl who is in the most recent season ended up kissing one of the boys in the very last episode. And it came out in that conversation because she said, oh yeah, I told you I didn't, like, I was afraid of having to kiss someone. I didn't want to do it. And then you were chasing me around all day saying, oh, I'm going to make you kiss someone. I'm going to make you kiss someone.
Oh my God.
And they were like laughing about it. But like the internet saw this and saw it for what it was, where it was a full grown man made an underage girl kiss somebody when she had expressed like anxiety and like that she did not want to do this as a joke because he found out that she didn't want to do it. Like, I think part of the story was like, it wasn't, they didn't even have it scripted for her to do that. But then once for some reason, because I think the last episode is a dance that they all go to. So I think in her head, two of the other actors kiss. And I think she was like, oh my God, am I going to have to kiss? You know? And so when he found that out, he scripted in a kiss for her to do because he thought it was funny to make her do something that she was scared to do on camera. And now that's going to live on forever. Everyone who rents that, like, can you imagine something that's so like vulnerable to you and you don't know if you want to do it or not, and you're a kid, and then it gets recorded and just viewed forever by everybody? And I think it's part of like how we sexualize children, because I think whenever we see kids kissing in movies, we think it's cute, or like we just don't think much of it. But it's like those are real people who had to do that. And so many actors have come out who are child actors saying like, yeah, I had my first kiss on camera, you know, and I didn't know what I was doing. And I was like terrified. And it's like, why do we need to see a 12-year-old kiss somebody? We don't need to see that, you know? And it's also, I mean, this is capitalism, which is always the problem. But it's also this idea that like when you create art, it's like the director is daddy and anything he wants, it's usually him, goes, and that there's no room to modify that art as you make it. But that's just not how collaborative art projects work, you know. And there's so many movies, there's so many shows where the actors came in and had some agency and maybe changed some lines of dialogue or said like, I don't want to do this, and it's fine, you know, you adjust. But I think children don't have that agency. Just like you were saying, like Zendaya has the agency to be like, these are the things I'm not going to do, and that's it, you know. And then the newer actresses on the show who weren't already known did not have that agency. And we all see that as like the price to pay to get into Hollywood.
Yeah.
But
it's
that's
like, why?
fucked up. Yeah. It's almost like we're helping to like sexually assault or like, you know, like cross the boundaries and like of these people because we support it as like, that's just how things work. And I think we really need to analyze that.
And I think that relates to that kind of competition thing between women. It's like, oh, well, they're like super hot and attractive, so like they have it so easy in life, and like it's like who cares if this happens to them, kind of thing.
Oh my God, Base Bass just brought up Dan Schneider and the feet stuff. Oh my God, yeah. I've actually watched a lot of videos
What is this? I don't know.
analyzing this. The guy who I guess made all these Nickelodeon kids shows was, I mean, there's just so much that has come out about his inappropriate relationships with the child stars. And the things that he would make them do because he had a foot fetish. And so he would make them like, he would script all these ridiculous scenes in where people were like playing with feet or like stepping on feet or smelling feet or just doing gross, weird things with feet. And he made these kids do that and like as part of his like fetish.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wasn't he the one too that he would have like girls getting hosed down with like whipped cream or like stuff that looked like cum all over their face and hair? And these are children. These are these are children on a children's television show.
Yeah.
That's so fucked.
Yeah, absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah.
Oh God. Yeah, but no, I just completely agree with what you both were saying. I wanted to talk a bit about like age gaps. I don't know if this is like an appropriate time. It
Yeah.
might be. But yeah, maybe can I share my screen? Let's see.
I think so. Should be able to.
Okay, let me see. Okay, yeah. So this is just a BuzzFeed article, but 47 fucked up age gaps between actors in movies and TV shows. And just speaking of like teens and having to do things or whatever. Yeah, so I wanted to bring this up because so often in or media and in Hollywood, this has just been normalized for a really long time that when we see on-screen romances, there's actually a tremendous age gap between the man and the woman. And sometimes it's like there are a few examples in here of it being the opposite direction too, of a very young boy with an older woman, but most often it's an older man and like a teen or someone in their maybe early 20s. But this is really normalized, and it really shapes the way that we see women and how women are supposed to look at different ages, because the two people are often presented as contemporaries, even though there might be a 30-year age gap between the two actors. But here are just a few things. So yeah, Hilary Duff was 15, making out with who's this guy, Chad Michael Murray, who is like turning 23. Mila Kunis, 15 and 20. That's not interesting. Keira Knightley, 17, 25. That's also not interesting. Who's this? Emmy Rossum, 17, making out with a 30-year-old and a 33-year-old. Just, like these are the kinds of romances that were being shown, or just this is a good example of Audrey Hepburn and Fred Astaire, right? Like we're always presented these stories, like I can stop sharing now, but we're always presented these stories where the love stories between these people who are, again, just presented as contemporaries, but they're like 30 years apart, maybe 40 years apart. Sometimes the woman is a teenager making out with a grown man or doing whatever with a grown man. And it's really, really damaging. And then you'll get kind of this very related phenomena where women in their 30s and 40s will be cast as the mom. Like they'll be cast as the mother of the male lead, even though the male lead might be the same age as the woman or just a few years younger or maybe even older. So it's like you can play a love interest as a woman if you're in your teens or 20s, and then after that you're basically just cast as the mom, even if you're younger than the male lead who's himself like in his 40s, 50s, or 60s, and you're the mom. I just find that it's so damaging, and it really, really skews our perception of what women are supposed to look like at different ages. And yeah, I mean, I think it's really messed up that, especially when you have teenagers who are playing love interests with, full grown adults. I just think this is really messed up.
Yeah. I saw a list like that, but it was real life couples.
Mm.
And it was like so many of my previous heartthrobs were on that list of, the one that stuck out to me the most was the guy who plays Dr. Reed on Criminal Minds, Matthew Grabler or some name like that. Anyway, I always had a huge crush on Dr. Reed and thought he was like the cutest. And then I saw that his girlfriend that I knew that he had, but I didn't know anything about her, they started dating when he was like 25 and she was like 16.
Mm.
And I was just like, God damn it. Like, can we not have any nice things?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just how many, it was like all these real life couples who, both of them were, at least one of them was an actor. Both of them were probably in some form of entertainment. But yeah, just how many of them were like 25, 30, 35 dating underage, like literally underage girls.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, like that timeline of Leonardo DiCaprio's girlfriends where like he gets older and they will remain like no older than 23 or something.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's pretty messed up. I was also thinking about the concept of corporate pedophilia as well, and how so much of our advertisements and attempts to sell products, it uses young children as like a way in which to sell the product. Like you can somehow attain that young girl through purchasing that product, or you can attain a certain like youthfulness through purchasing a certain product. And like and also just how harmful that is for the people for the children who are having to like be sexualized in these like advertisements in order to be able to like make a living, I guess, or like get money. And are they really comfortable with that being the way that they're presented? And I think it's really interesting because I think that a lot of the time adults sort of idealize this state of innocence or sexualize kids as a mechanism through which they can attain like this youthful state again, because I think as a result of capitalism and patriarchy, white supremacy and all of these systems, most of us like are grinding and like miserable and kind of romanticize this like ability to be childlike again and innocent and wild and free. And so a lot of the time like kids are sexualized like, oh, through this child I can attain that again. And I guess that relates to, Nicole, what you were mentioning earlier about like the attraction to like the kids who don't have needs. But I think like a lot of the time it's like, oh yeah, if I can just date this young woman or this young man, then I can be wild and free and young again. And I think it's like really messed up that we have this kind of like fetishization of this innocent childlike joy. And how that's often used by corporations, like, I'll buy this product and you can return to this like childlike innocence again. But really that's like through the body of the child, like through actually being with a child or sexualizing a child. And I think it's really messed up. And I was also thinking about how kids are often depicted as very passive objects a lot of the time, and like they don't have any kind of agency or any kind of sexuality or anything like that of their own. And so they just become these vessels for us to project onto our own desires or our own wishes, or like just like to dominate and control. And like I think it's like a really nuanced conversation, because at the same time we don't want to sexualize kids, but we don't want to deny that they have any kind of agency or freedom of like being able to express themselves in any way. And if we don't allow them that, then they just become these like empty objects of adult fantasy, basically. Sorry, did you have something to say? Or?
I maybe, but keep going.
No, I was just going to talk about right-wing nostalgia. So I don't know if it's.
Well, Paul brought up a great comment, but I wasn't sure like where it fits in the conversation. But just saying, my first partner was 38 years old while I was 23, completely inexperienced, had undiagnosed autism. I thought it was fine at the time, but in hindsight, I'm not so sure. And that's why like I like to talk about relationships with a large age gap, because it's very delicate. Because I have a lot of friends, and this happens in queer communities a lot, where you'll be someone who's younger and inexperienced and you end up hooking up with someone who's much older and is out and has more experience than you, and maybe you're not quite out yet. That's very common. And then it's also just very common for young people to date in a heterosexual sense with a large age gap, particularly young women. And the difficulty is a lot of times people will defend those relationships that they had and say that they were great and that they taught them a lot, and that they were very healthy, and even when they were underage. And it's like, I never want to take that agency away from someone. I never want to take it away from someone, that they're able to process things in their own way. But I've also seen that over time, like over the course of your life, a lot of times when people start getting close to the age of the person that they were with, they start to be like, wait a minute, you know, like I'm 38 and I'm now looking at 16-year-olds and they look like babies to me. Like, why was this person interested in me? And just as you have more life experience and you start to understand, like, oh, as someone in their 30s, like, wow, I really feel so much different. I have so much more economic power. I have so much more life experience. I have so much better boundaries. There's so many things that I just did not have when I was a kid. And now that I have these things, I can understand this huge power imbalance between me and this other person. So I just want to say that, like, if anyone's listening and they don't like that we're critiquing big age gaps, it's like, I get it. And I don't want to say that they can never work. I don't agree with dating underage people. Again, maybe a hot take, I don't know. But I want to say I also want to have the conversation, because even if someone's not ready yet, there may come a day when having heard this will help them, because we do process things differently as we get older. And I think the three of us have been, offline talking about a lot of our own experiences that we're now recontextualizing with the analysis that we have and with the life experience that we have, to be like, whoa, I always thought this was okay, or I didn't think much about it. And now I'm realizing this was actually pretty bad. And so that happens. And it's, Paul, I'm very sorry that happened to you, because and I think I also wanted to bring up your comment, because I think those of us who are on the spectrum as well are particularly susceptible to this kind of thing. And that's why, again, it's not just a matter of like, people on the spectrum tend to be agreeable and consent to things when we don't actually maybe mean yes, which makes it difficult, right, to have conversations about consent and whatnot. Because even for us, like, if we feel any measure of coercion, if we have it in our heads that this is something we're supposed to do, because we're very susceptible to, like, societal scripts on how things are supposed to go. This is another reason I love to analyze media, because as an autistic, media did shape my ideas about how I was supposed to do things, and, in relationships, sexually, whatever, how I was supposed to look. So I think it's another aspect of this to factor in, that, like, people on the spectrum, I don't want to say that we're always childlike, but we do tend to be a bit naive. We do tend to be a bit literal. We tend to be very trusting because of that. And we can really get taken advantage of in a lot of these situations, with especially major age gaps, where someone is probably picking up on the fact that we don't really know, but that we're suggestible, and that we're looking for love, and that we maybe want to have these experiences, so it's like, it puts us in a spot where we can be really vulnerable to an older predator.
Yeah, that's really well said. And it's like, I guess, there are different relationships, and you have to think about, like, the different contexts that people are in or whatnot. But I think that generally, because there's so many of these kind of age gap videos on YouTube, and I've seen some people, kind of critiquing some of them or whatnot. But we see a lot of the same dynamics in a lot of the relationships, and it's very often a very older man and a younger woman, or an older man and a younger man. It's rarely an older woman and a younger man, but I mean, definitely there are, I guess, more of those relationships coming up as well. But so many of the same kind of tropes will come up in the relationships. Like, the older person typically has money and the younger person doesn't, or the younger person was in a bind, or I don't know, like, had some kind of tragedy happen to them and they were looking for a father figure. And so this older person with the money and the experience, and it's, I mean, there's just a lot to process there, obviously. And I think that part of the pedophilic culture also, as young girls, you're socialized from a young age. I mean, all of us are socialized to think, like, oh, well, girls just mature faster than boys, and that's just the way things are. And I was reading something that was really funny, and it was like, we always hear that same trope, right? That, like, girls just mature faster, and so therefore it's normalized. Like, oh, if you're a girl in high school, then you want to date a college guy, or I remember in high school, like, yeah, the celebrities I was attracted to were much, much older men. But that kind of trope is just instilled in you. And I read this funny thing that it was like, we always hear that trope that like girls just mature faster than boys, but that it's always used in this way to just excuse this kind of boys will be boys, like just let them off the hook, let these men just be assholes basically, or be completely irresponsible, and they can't help it because they're just not mature. So you just looked at, take pity on them, instead of the other way around where it's like, oh, girls mature faster than boys, so therefore boys, you should look to girls as people to look up to and respect and emulate, and like you should really take their lead, or it's never like that kind of respectful framing of it. But yeah, I mean, I think that like you said, Nick, I just think there can be often a lot to process there, especially if there's these other kind of contextual pieces to the relationship. And yeah, so I'm glad that we're talking about it.
Yeah. And you have to be, I know I mentioned it before, but I have tended to date men younger than me ever since I hit my like mid 30s. And it's not intentional. It just, I don't seek out people younger than me, but it's just like what has worked out. And in every instance, and younger, it's usually like 3 to at most 10 years age difference. And at every point, I'm always like so cognizant of my power in the relationship. And it's something that I communicate about a lot and I'm very careful about. And I just see other people being so irresponsible, in my view, with that, because this other person is just so impressionable. And I don't want to infantilize someone just because they're younger, but it is true. Like you just tend to learn better boundaries as you grow up, and you get life experience, and that helps shape you and just make you more solid in like your self-esteem and your view of the world and what you want. And I just, I think like I said, these situations can occur and they don't have to be bad, but I think the older person in the party always has to be really honest with themselves about what they're doing in the relationship, what they're getting out of it, and how they're helping the other person to have enough space and agency to discover themselves and set boundaries and have autonomy without fear of your retribution in some way, And I just wish I saw more people approaching situations from that perspective, because I've been shocked being in these situations of how even a few years can make a big difference. And the times when I've had to break up with someone because I'm like, hey, you wanted kids and now you're saying you'll not have kids because of me. And we've been dating for like 2 weeks. That's no. Like that, like I feel that you don't have good enough boundaries for us to be in a relationship and to be talking about like big life decisions like that, So yeah, it just so often I see it where the older person is just like, oh, they just like don't want anything, and they don't, they're just happy all the time and they don't have any needs. And it's like, that's a huge red flag that like the two of you do not have an equal relationship, because I guarantee you, no matter what someone's age, they have needs, they have boundaries, they have desires, they have like things that they want. They're just probably either not being given the space to figure that out, or they're not feeling comfortable in expressing it.
Yep, absolutely. I was thinking that we could move on to talking about the implications of the pedophilic gaze. I know that we've sort of covered a lot of that already, but yeah, did either of you have anything to talk about in terms of the ways in which the pedophilic gaze manifests, or are you happy to move on to the implications?
At some point, I do want to talk about some more media stuff. It shouldn't be super long, so I don't know if it'd be good to do that now or after.
Yeah, now would be good.
Okay. So one of the last things I wanted to bring up around Euphoria is part of what I noticed watching this last season is that it's not just sexualizing the characters in the show, but it also puts them in adult situations and frames them as if they like know more than their age. So we see, like, I guess spoiler alert, but Cassie completely overriding her identity and like submitting to Nate's control in this really fucking weird, dark way. And it's like she's supposed to be this high school student, and it just feels very like 50 Shades of Grey or something, where it's like mommy porn, but it's this teenager doing it. It's like, why would this teenager be submitting to these like power dynamics? I don't know. It always feels like I'm not judging anyone who's into that. I'm just saying, like, as character development, it just seems to come out of nowhere. And it seems to be part of this thing, even the way that Cassie and Maddie dress often, and most of them besides Rue, it's not even that their dress is very provocative or revealing. It is often that, but like that could be fine. But it's also very mature. It's like sometimes they're dressed as if they're like 1950s housewives or something. And I'm always like they have Maddie sits for this very rich woman. So she babysits and goes to her house, and, you know, her house is like huge and beautiful, and she's got expensive alcohol and beautiful clothes and all this stuff. And Maddie's always like putting on her clothes. And the way she walks around the house is as if she owns the house. And it just really struck me this last time that it like just made her seem very adult in a way that like she isn't actually. And I think within the narrative of the show, you have stuff like this adds that dynamic of like, oh, these are kids, but they really know, you know, they're adults too. But also it's the way that the parents in the show treat the kids, or the way that adults in the show treat the kids. And you see like Nate's dad fucks Jules. Cassie and Lexi's mom is like a hot mess, and she basically acts like their friend and lets them throw parties at her house and drinks with them. The woman that Maddie babysits for seems to be into her, and there's always like this very strong sexual tension anytime they're talking to one another. The kids are constantly like moving each other into their houses without even asking their parents. So they'll say like, you're going to come live with me, I'm picking you up. And it's like, live with you where? You don't own a home. Like, what do you mean at your parents' house? But the way they say it is like, oh, you're moving in with me, as if like I own my own home. That's how it's like framed. And then you even have scenes like Nate moved Cassie into his house, and they're like fucking super loudly, and the parents can hear, and the parents are just like, these kids, you know? And it just creates this atmosphere of like within the narrative of the show, the kids are not being seen as kids by anybody. Even the adults in the show are not looking at them or treating them as children. And I think that serves to enhance the fact that like we as the audience are also not supposed to see them that way. Whereas some people brought up in the chat, like sex education, because sex education does also have sex scenes between people who are supposed to be teenagers. And I think that's a good example of how you can show sex between teens. And I think that it's fine, because the sex scenes that you see often aren't actually sexy in terms of they're not filmed to be erotic or arousing. They're filmed to be educational. And they're often filmed to show two characters talking through an awkward sex thing together and having open communication and good consent, and showing how like as a teenager, these things can be embarrassing, but if you just talk about them, like it can be fine. You know, you can work it out and it's actually totally normal. So you have that, and they're never showing anything explicit between the characters either. Sometimes they're actually fucking and they even show orgasms and stuff, but it never feels like it's part of this titillating gaze that we're supposed to be like, oh yeah, that's hot. It's more like, oh, that's funny, or that's awkward, or yeah, I've had that happen to me too. Or if I'm a kid, I'm seeing this and I'm feeling less alone and I'm feeling more comfortable in my body. And like, I kind of understand now how I can move forward with my partner and talk about something. And I think importantly, the adults in the show treat the kids as kids. So within the show, the kids are peers to one another, but the adults are adults and the kids are kids. And I think that that's really important. And you see that there. The last two examples that were brought up is Leon the Professional, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. But I haven't watched it like recently.
Mhm.
So I've had it on my list for a while to do a rewatch with like a very critical eye. But in that movie, Natalie Portman, who is, I believe, 11 at the time, ends up teaming up with this hitman who's much older. And she develops romantic feelings for him and is kind of like being very flirty with him. But he never, and this is where I want to rewatch it and make sure that I'm remembering it right. But it seems like he's always kind of like put off by it and just very unsure how to handle it, but is very much like, you're a child, I'm an adult, like this is not a thing. And I think within the framing of the movie, it makes sense why she would develop these feelings for him, because she's from a very abusive home. You get the sense that maybe she's been, you know, abused in some way as a child. And this is like a father figure coming in who's actually taking care of her and making her feel safe. And it is very common for kids to confuse that with romantic love. And to, you know, cultivate that kind of dynamic with someone. And the point is that as adults, we need to be the adult who's seeing that and being like, oh, you're a child. And like, this is a normal reaction you're having to this situation. And as the adult, I'm not going to encourage this. I'm not going to shame you, but I'm also going to shut this down, you know, and like not take advantage of this situation. And I think the movie does that well. What I think from my memory, what could be critiqued is I do feel like the camera kind of lingers on her as she's being very precocious in a way that probably is not great. So anyway, this is a huge caveat for like, I haven't seen it in the last, you know, 5 or 10 years. But I think the narrative comes through fairly well that like she is having these feelings for him because she's never had anyone take care of her, and she's confused in the way that's very common for a kid to be confused, who like has been taught fucked up messages about love, and the adult in the situation handles it well in that he doesn't encourage it and just kind of, you know, and he never seems like tempted either. He just seems very, he's like a very awkward person. So he just seems very like, oh, like, what do I do here? And then the last example that was brought up was Anakin Skywalker from Star Wars, and the age difference between him and Padme, where they met when he was 6 years old, and she was, I don't remember how old, but she was at least a teenager, if not an adult. And then they end up, you know, being in love with each other when they get a bit older. And I think that that is a good example of a kid, yes, being sexualized. But again, I do also want to point out that it is part of the male gaze, where I feel that the point of that relationship was to be like, this is kind of cool. Because I think a lot of boys think it's cool to be into an older woman and then eventually hook up with her. And that was the vibe I got from it. I still agree that it's like a pedophilic dynamic, you know, from Padme. It's very gross and weird. But I think from the director's viewpoint, this was one of those things where it's like, oh, can you imagine having a crush on the girl who babysat you, and then when you're a teenager you actually get to hook up with that girl? Like, that's the vibes I got from that dynamic. So I want to just point out that like it's still very male gazy, and it is definitely pedophilic.
Yeah, well, I think that's like definitely like you know, a big issue with the way that we talk about like pedophilia when it's a woman and a young boy. Because I'm thinking of other films like, oh God, I can't remember what it's called. Kate Blanchett is in it, and she's a teacher, and she has sex with a student.
Oh, The Reader?
No, it.
I mean,
was,
she wasn't a teacher in that, but
no, it's a different one, because it's her and Judi Dench is in it, I think. But
Damn,
anyway,
how many movies did she make where she fucked a boy?
I don't know.
8. The hell?
But wait, isn't the reader Kate Winslet?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so
I'm
I'm
getting
talking
my
about,
Kates mixed up.
yeah. So it's Kate Blanchett, but I mean, yeah, there's different films where women fuck boys or whatever. But in the Kate Blanchett one, this kid was really framed as this like, oh, he was like a sexy young guy, and like he was pursuing her. Like there's a lot of there's scenes where he's just like, oh hey miss, you know, and just really kind of like looking at her and whatever. But yeah, I mean, I just think about there's just that trope that if it's a young boy with an older woman, we have this idea like, oh, good for him. Like that's kind of the trope that they get under the male gaze. Like, way to
and
go.
boys are seen as having more agency than girls.
Right.
So it's almost seen as like this is an equal power dynamic, but it's like it's not though. One of these people is a child.
Yeah. Oh, it's Notes on a Scandal. Yeah. Opting out.
Oh yeah.
Yes, that's what it is. Notes on a Scandal. And yeah, exactly. I just think that is really problematic because it's a lot of the same issues with when the genders are reversed, that it's like we're ascribing way too much agency to these young boys, because like the patriarchy is congratulating them for like scoring with an older woman, because we just have this idea that men are just always DTF, and that any time that they can have sex with anyone is supposed to be a win for them. And so, yeah, it's really problematic where, yeah, I mean, I think when things like this happen in real life, like, I just think those tropes are really problematic as well. And I think it's good that there are some pieces of media that do portray that dynamic the other way around. I would have to watch that again to see like how it's handled, but yeah.
Yeah, I even watched a teacher, which I don't know why I watched this freaking show, but it was about a teacher who sleeps with her student, a male student, and I forget their exact age differences, but I'm pretty sure the student is 16 and she's a grown-up, you know, like a full, like late 20s, early 30s, something like that. And the thing was that the show definitely portrays this as wrong. Like they even use the words grooming at one point, and it makes it clear that this is not okay. And yet it also shows them having sex in a very erotic way. It was like some of the sex scenes were very steamy, and I was like, I feel weird about how I feel right now watching this. And it almost shows the way that it portrays their chemistry and stuff. It almost shows it in a way where it's like you can kind of understand how this happened, because, you know, same thing, he was a bit more of the aggressor in the beginning. And it's a kid from Love, Simon, who, like, I find he's one of those actors who he could probably just like look at a wall and look like he has all this chemistry with the wall. You know, there's just some actors who like can sizzle at anybody and you're just like, oh my. So they cast this kid who's very charismatic and is very like, has this sort of charisma. So it makes him feel like he just has so much more agency. And even though the story does go on to show like the long-term negative effects of this relationship on him and how he was victimized by her, I feel like it was a very cake and eat it, have your cake and eat it too moment, because it also definitely got its mileage out of like the sex scenes between them and things like him bragging like, you know, he would go hook up with other girls and like be like, oh, you know, he would like do stuff and be like, oh, I learned that from her, you know, like that trope of like young men learning from older women and then taking those skills to younger women who are like, oh my God, what are you doing to me? Which is just weird. I have a lot of thoughts about that. But anyway, it just, yeah, I feel like it's so hard to get media that can actually portray a young man or a boy as an actual victim and not fall into this trope of like, okay, he's a victim, but isn't it still kind of hot though? Or okay, he's a victim, but he's still got like these bragging points off of it.
Yeah.
And got to be cool for doing this thing. Whereas, you know, we have a lot of issues with how women are portrayed, but I do feel that often if you reverse the genders, it just like wouldn't be the same.
Oh God, yeah.
Yara Zaid just released a Patreon video she did, I think, a year ago. on her YouTube channel about 40 Days and 40 Nights. And she talks about this and that because essentially the main character is raped, is sexually assaulted in that movie, and it's played off for laughs. And she's like, there's just even as bad, because I think it was made in the early aughts. So it's like even as bad as we were about sexual assault and women and everything then, I really don't think like if the genders had been reversed that would have flown even then. You know, like I think it would have been more clear that like, oh, this person was sexually assaulted and like this was not funny and not okay. But it was because it was a guy, it was like laughed off and really funny. And throughout the whole movie, the guy's trying to assert his own agency. He's trying to say like, I don't want to do these things. I'm trying to do something for myself. And everyone's making fun of him and basically telling him like he's a loser and what he should do with himself. And it's like, yeah, I think that's a huge issue that we have with men is like, we see them as having all the agency and power, but only if they're doing what we expect them to do. And if they're not, then we just completely override what they want and how they think and feel. Hi, Kat.
I'm sorry, the cat was making so much noise, so I thought it's better to let her in, but now she's taking over. Sorry, I got really distracted.
It's okay.
By where we were.
So I think we could talk about implications, whatever ones we haven't covered yet.
Sure. I think I just wanted to mention as well, when it comes to the media, just how fucked up it is when we think about Biden and Trump. And like, I don't know if people have seen that Biden video where he basically is like, it's like a compilation of all of the weird touching of young girls, like okay, wait 1 second. Sophia, no, go down there. Oh Jesus. Sophia, you're ruining my stream. Oh my god. Oh,
She's
Jesus.
like, this is the cataphilic stream, bitch.
Yeah.
Take it over. Opting out said I was going to take off and start dinner, then Kat.
Yeah. Paul also said complicated feelings about Call Me by Your Name. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think you're
muted somewhere.
Silent, or I can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I was just saying that there's like compilation of assaulting all these young girls, and it's absolutely disgusting. And
your audio's something's going wild with your audio.
oh
yeah, you're getting crackling.
It's getting a lot of crackling.
I'm trying to see. I don't know if it's the mic here, maybe in your hair. Latasha said me during my Zoom meetings at work. So
is that better?
I think so. Yeah. So far.
Hello?
Okay,
Yes.
that's better.
Can you hear us?
Hello?
Yeah.
We can hear you. Can you
Hello?
hear us? She can't hear us.
Oh, I can hear you. I can hear you now.
Okay. I was going to go and chat and be like, just talk.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Man plans and cat laughs.
Okay, so Biden sniffing and assaulting.
Sorry.
Yeah, Biden sniffing people.
Sniffing, assaulting, and then also Trump, with the fact that there was that scandal where the woman who like came out and said that Trump had raped her when she was like 14 or something. I don't know, and just this stuff is so normalized that like it wasn't even a part of the elections or anything, like barely ever mentioned any of it. And I don't know, I just think it really speaks to this culture that this stuff is just so normalized as well, with like Epstein and Bill Gates, and it's just and even like the Andrew guy in the monarchy, and the fact that he's like now paid off this woman that he assaulted, and like now he's gonna be fine. I don't know, it's just like all this stuff, it's like so normalized that like it doesn't even really like make a dent in anyone's like thinking in any way. And it's just really, it's just so tragic. And like the fact that people can actually be prime minister and that be the reality, I don't know.
Yeah. It's almost considered like their reward, like, oh, but they're rich, powerful men, like of course they get to assault women and younger and underage girls.
Yeah, such a good point. Yeah, and then just in general implications, I mean, obviously, I think this completely leads to pedophilia actually happening in real life. I don't think that it's enough to just see pedophilia as like biological or innate or inevitable or like reduced to a few sick individuals in any way. I read some statistics that 44% of rape victims in the US are under the age of 18. And like just the fact that, you know, the majority of rape victims are like under the age of 18 just shows how much those like attractions are centered around, or like power dynamics in sex is centered around like underage children. And yeah, and I think that this kind of thing also can lead to like fat phobia and just like unhealthy eating disorders and things, because like people are trying to maintain that kind of prepubescent body, and it also leads to so many like body image issues and like hating ourselves for the way that we look, like hating aging, being so afraid of ever like getting any wrinkles or anything like that, because we're so wanting to like hold on to that feeling of still being attractive in the pedophilic gaze. And yeah, and I also think it's so interesting that hypersexuality is such a common response to sexual violence. And I really think it speaks to the fact that, like, I don't know, I know there's many reasons for hypersexuality, but I feel like one of them is probably the result of the fact that we deep down know that our, like, the more innocent or virginal or sexually naive we seem, the more vulnerable we are. At least that's how I felt. I felt like in order to protect myself as a self-defense mechanism, I had to present myself as hypersexual and very sexually liberated and knowledgeable, and go out and act that way in order to keep myself safe. And I think that is a direct result of this kind of pedophilic culture and pedophilic gaze, that like, oh, I can't possibly seem innocent or childlike because that makes me that puts me in danger. Let me construct myself as like intimidating for men so that they won't touch me or they won't be attracted to me. And yeah, and I think that is like also an interesting manifestation of like the pedophilic gaze.
And I think it's part of the fallacy that we have, that if someone wants to fuck you, you have power. We're sold that constantly all the time, and I think that's what a lot of the pedophilic gaze is honestly predicated upon, is like, if a child, you know, is being cute, is showing any sense of romantic or sexual interest, which is actually very normal for kids to do. It's very normal for kids to play with their sexuality and have little crushes and, you know, experiment with things. We see that as, okay, if this child, you know, has the attention of someone, then that child has the power, and the other person is sort of helpless. And that's part of incel culture as well, is that women have all the power because men want to fuck them, and they get to choose who gets to fuck them, and, you know, create this commodity around that. And it's just false. It's absolutely false that because someone wants to fuck you, you have all the power. A lot of times you have less power in that situation because you're being objectified, and you're being your entire personhood is now being filtered through this person's desire and ideas of you. And if they want to have you, if they want to get at you, then you deciding when they can have that. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like I don't know, it's like anything under capitalism, right? It's like, okay, I may have a few dollars and that gives me some power to go like purchase something, but I don't actually have power under the system at all.
And it's so nonsensical, because it's like, if you're actually upset and you think that that is us having power, like, if you just didn't objectify us, then we wouldn't have that power. Like, it's because you
Right.
objectify us to such a ridiculous degree, now you think that we have this power. Like, if you just didn't objectify us and like actually treated us like human beings and not just as like these objects to conquer, you know, or to use or whatever, then we wouldn't have this quote unquote power, which, as you said, yeah, it's not power. And we talked, I mean, I think our whole stream on bad sex versus sexual assault is really a great example of this, where most of the time we experience that, that, you know, that is just extreme pressure. And as you talked about, especially for people who have autism and things like that, like it can be really difficult to navigate. And yeah, it's not empowering to feel like a gatekeeper. Like, you want to actually feel like a human being that's in a mutual relationship or experience with somebody else, you know. Like, this, it's not empowering to be, yeah, you know, objectified.
No, it's not. And it just, I think it is a big part of the problem, is that we have these very rigid and very false ideas of what childhood is, what it means to grow. And I think that's a big part of the problem. And just the weird idea that like kids have no agency, but then somehow also have like full sexual agency is very strange. You know, if we're talking about a kid who has a crush on someone, let's be real too. Like, a lot of times kids don't want to fuck somebody. They have a crush, and it makes them have all the fuzzy feelings that crushes make you have, and they don't necessarily know what they want to do with that. You know, they may just know that they like being near someone and that person makes them feel good. And we translate, like, we're the ones as adults who are translating that into like sex, because that may not even be what the kid's thinking. Shit, where was I going with that? Oh, we did so good. I made it till the end of the stream before I lost my train of thought.
Well, I can jump in while you're thinking, because yeah, when I was younger, like the way that because I was, I guess, quite like quote unquote sexual when I was quite young. Like, I started masturbating quite young and whatever, but like my feelings were all very like I would have crushes on people in, you know, my class and whatever. And so my feelings were really, yeah, it's true. It's like, I guess I would have very sexual feelings, but they were connected to this kind of broader, like, embodied connection, or like, you know, want for a connection that I was feeling, and trying to figure out like who I was, who other people were, like how I could relate to them in relationships and whatever. Like, it wasn't this like just sheer objectifying, like, yeah, I'm just out here wanting to fuck whoever, whenever, you know.
Right.
And I think that like a lot of children, that's how they start to kind of explore and learn about their sexualities. And then, I mean, at a very young age, I think a lot of especially young men are exposed to porn, which really like severs that idea of like intimacy from sex very completely. But yeah, we're just kind of brought into these kind of tropes that are very objectifying and very, I don't know, like stereotypical and mechanical and things like that. And it becomes very confusing then, right? To try to navigate like where you fit within all of that.
Yeah, it's like, instead of getting to find a peer and figuring that stuff out in this like consensual kind of equal way, you know, then your kid feelings are like reinterpreted by adults and then funneled down this one path of like sex and sexuality in this like heteronormative way, that you lose that ability to kind of play and figure things out together. Like, I'm so grateful that my first partner in high school, the first person I dated, like seriously, did not put pressure on me at all. And that's what we did. Like, we really were like, okay, we kind of want to try this thing. And we would just like check in with each other and go really slow. And neither one of us knew what the hell we were doing. But like, we actually had the ability to kind of just organically build on like what we were doing with one another and our feelings for one another, and have really nice open communication, and everything felt very safe. And it just felt very equal because we were, the same age, and we were both just like figuring it out, and it was really nice. And, I had sexual feelings for her right away, but like, well, I shouldn't even say it. Like, I had romantic feelings for her, and it took me a little while because we started dating when I was 15. So it took me a little while to even figure out, like, what do I mean by that? Like, what do I want to do with my body when I have these feelings? And for a while it was like, hold hands, kiss. And then it like became other things, but it wasn't like, oh, I have a crush on this person, so now I want to fuck, It was like, I want to have this process with someone else. And then you start to figure things out. And that's how you build sexual agency, is like having these very equal, very safe opportunities to explore your curiosities and be able to, set boundaries or modify things as they're happening, or say, oh, that ended up not being for me. And I just think when, adults kind of come in and take over, especially with these like statutory age differences, it's like, if you get someone who's 15 or 16 and you're in your mid-20s or you're in your 30s, I don't think that person gets that opportunity to just kind of like really explore themselves and their sexuality and their romantic like mode of operating organically. I just don't, because you already know everything. So like, even if you try to give them agency, it's just not the same.
Absolutely.
And I know for some people that can be the draw, and whatever, but I just think in a lot of cases it means that person gets delayed in when they're finally able to figure things out for themselves. And I think that's why the three of us, plus every other female friend I have right now, is going through this process of like reanalyzing every sexual experience we've been through and being like, wow, a lot of these are pretty bad.
Yeah. And I feel like we learn that in order to be attractive, in order to be desired by men, means like constant sexual availability to them, and constant you may not even want to have sex with your first boyfriend for a long time or whatever, or your first partner, whoever that may be, but because kids are so hypersexualized, it's like forced onto you that like, no, this is a script you've got to follow, otherwise you're not going to be desired by that person, or like they're not going to want you. And then like you said, you follow all these sexual scripts and that don't often feel good for you in any way, but it's just like, oh, this is just what it's supposed to be, this is how it looks. So you're not really able to authentically be with each other or play or whatever. You're just like trying to fit into this script of like how to make yourself as like conform to this pedophilic beauty standard and like pedophilic way of acting, through being as like docile and innocent and doe-eyed and as like submissive or whatever as possible, so that they are attracted to you. And like, how can you ever truly be authentic? And I think this, just as a wider culture, like how much this affects our love and our sexual lives in general, and like how we love each other is like such a fundamentally important aspect of life. And like, if in these moments of vulnerability and like sharing on some of the most intimate like aspects of ourselves, whether that's sexually or like in terms of like loving each other, and we have to do it in such a distorted way in which we can't really truly be ourselves, like how that must like impact every other aspect of our lives. Like, I don't think we can even fully comprehend. I mean, I'm working through all this stuff and I'm always confused like to try and figure out what is my actual desires compared to what is like has been taught to me, and like how this impacts like every aspect of my life. And it's like so hard to dismantle. Like, I was even thinking about the fact that when, I think I've shared this before, but when I was sexually abused by the man who was like a pedophile who was in his 50s, and I was like 8-9 years old. And I remember one of my first thoughts was like being flattered that this man wanted me. And also I had a thought about like being self-conscious about the hair that was on my vagina. And
Wow.
and it was crazy to think back on now, like that was one of my first thoughts that I had. Like obviously there was fear and there was feeling incredibly like terrified and all of that, but that those were the first thoughts. And I think that really speaks to this pedophilic culture, like that already from such a young age I sort of had these feelings about body hair, but I don't even know where that came from, because it definitely didn't come from my parents, because my mum is like very hairy and I was trying to think of a better way to say it, but yeah. And so like I'm like, I didn't really watch that much media or anything, so where did that come from? And then and then like the desire, like feeling flattered to be desired by an older man from such a young age, like the indoctrination must have already occurred on some level. I mean, some of that can obviously be explained by like, if you experience a lack of love, then you search for love in other places. But still, I think like a lot of it was actually just like, oh, I'm wanted by an older man. And yeah, it's pretty fucked up when we start to internalize that being attractive to like predators is something that we should feel good about.
Yeah. That's very powerful and very
Heavy.
yeah. Well, and it's no in a good way.
Like a power, yeah.
Because it's
like
true, and it was just making me think about my assault 2 years ago, and how one of the hardest things for me to process about it is how embarrassed I felt about saying like I wasn't like I hadn't been planning to hook up with someone, so I hadn't like groomed, and like when it happened, like all the lights were on in the hotel room, and hotel room lighting is terrible, and it just happened, and it like I felt unprepared for it, and how much of like the shame and the cringiness, and what's so hard for me to even think about it is more my shame at like not being like the hair that I had on my vagina, or like the way that the lighting was like unflattering. And it's just so wild to me. It makes me feel so embarrassed and ashamed that is what keeps coming up for me the most strongly when I think back on this like bad thing that happened to me. Because it's like, why do I care what he thinks, or why do I care what I look like? Like, this was a bad thing that happened, but it is so embedded to have those thoughts about like, oh, like I think too, just because it's so vulnerable, it's like this other person saw this part of me, and I know it wasn't up to par. And like, that's what he's walking around knowing and thinking about. And that's what I'm thinking about. And it's just this weird thing. It's like, I trip up on it all the time. Like, I think about it all the time still, and have this like, and your gut clenches up, and you just feel really embarrassed. And I just get that feeling all the time. And I'm just like, this is wild, that this is what I took away from this experience the most strongly, is this sense of shame because I didn't look a certain way when this person assaulted me.
Yeah, that's also like I meant heavy and like just really important and powerful,
like profound
way. Yeah, because I think these experiences are just so telling to the level of kind of indoctrination that we experience in this society, and how deep our socialization goes, that we even have trouble seeing ourselves as victims. And like, even in those moments where we are being actively abused or victimized, we're still worried about performing properly for the male gaze,
Yeah, absolutely.
I remembered what I was going to say before when I was on my tangent, but I was just going to say, and I think one of you brought it up and I can't remember which one, but just talking about kids having how we don't show kids having any real autonomy or agency, except for in this way. And I was thinking, like, so yes, if a kid had a crush on someone, as adults, that might be interpreted as like sexual interest, which would be interpreted as maturity and agency. But if that same kid had like cancer and wanted to like have a say in their own treatment plan, they probably wouldn't be allowed to. That kid would not be allowed to vote. You know, there's like so many different ways in which kids have no autonomy, and we kind of see them. I think what one of you had said is almost like blank slates or like empty vessels. And I think that that's something to, I think part of dismantling the pedophilic gaze, something I'm very passionate about, is like exploring ways that we can give children and young people more agency, more autonomy, more representation in our culture. Because I think we're still, I mean, it wasn't until very recently that kids were legally looked at as property, like shockingly recently. I think the first anti-abuse laws came out in either the 70s or the 80s. So we're looking at, like, as a culture, we still look at children. We only very recently started looking at children as like autonomous beings from a legal perspective anyway. And I think you can see that in the way that we explore the way that we view kids and the decisions we think that they're allowed to make and the information that they're allowed to have. And part of, you know, I think, Kathrin, you've touched on this before, but part of the issue too is that because we don't see them as having this agency, we don't talk to them about sex. We don't talk to them about predators. We don't talk to them about consent or boundaries or anything, because we think that's going to be like too heavy, or it'll, you know, entice them to want to do these things too early. And then if you bump up against a predator and you're unprepared and no one's ever talked to you about it, then you're more susceptible to that person. So I think, like, part of this dismantling the male gaze, the pedophilic gaze, is working towards helping children have as much of a voice in their own lives as possible, and normalizing us, allowing them to talk freely about their thoughts and feelings and experiences, and not shaming that.
Yeah, and when we do talk to kids about things like that, it's always framed in like, oh, little girls don't wear skirts that are too short, or focus on what you're wearing, or like don't act in certain ways and things like that, which again is just like reinforcing this idea of that this stuff inevitably happens, and like we can't prevent men from doing it. And yeah, it's your fault for the way in which you look, which is just like, again, reducing women to their bodies and like inherently as sexual objects. And we've got to like desexualize ourselves as much as possible. And like that, the whole narrative around like how to deal with sexual violence is so reduced to basically like changing how you look, or changing your appearance, or like how you're acting, or whatever. Like that is like what the narrative has reduced to. We're in the 21st century and like we're still there. Like, what the fuck is going on? And that is the extent of the education that we're receiving as well. Like, it's just crazy. It's just so crazy. And then obviously with the prison system, that the only thing that can happen is like after it happens, then you do something about it, which of course is then just like, yeah, these things is inevitably going to happen. All we can do is lock people away. I don't know, just all like the whole way in which our culture talks about pedophilia and pedophilic culture is really just like pathologizing like individuals, rather than seeing it in any way linked to patriarchy or capitalism or white supremacy, or like any of these systems of oppression. And like even on the left, I feel like loads of people don't really see the ways in which it's linked to these broader systems. And yeah, it's very frustrating.
It is indeed. Latasha said, kids are seen as property of their parents still to this day. Absolutely. The whole uproar over giving kids the right to choose whether they wanted the vaccine shows that those beliefs are still there. And I think you see that too. Like, you know, I obviously am usually the most radical friend in my friend group. And there's always this idea of sometimes even me having tattoos or whatever, there's always just this weird idea that I'm like corrupting people's kids just by like existing in front of them. Or that if a kid asks me a question, I'm not allowed to just honestly answer it. And you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like parents have this, they feel like they have ownership over even what information their child is exposed to, which I find really creepy and concerning. Because it's like, I get you don't want your kid to have harmful ideas, get exposed to harmful ideas, and I understand that we're all going to disagree on what a harmful idea is. But at the same time, it's like, you're keeping your kids so isolated that they're so vulnerable, and you're not teaching them to think for themselves. You're not saying like, yeah, we can talk about anything, you know, and we'll just talk it through. Or like, you can go talk to Auntie Nick about whatever. And like, if you have questions, let me know and we can talk about it after. But there's always this idea, you know, it's just like, as someone who really loves talking to kids and thinks that they're just so like interesting and they're just so much more complex than we give them credit for, I like being able to just be really honest with kids and like talk to them and have conversations. But I always have this fear and anxiety that there's going to be a parent who's pissed at me for just like not preaching to the kid, but just answering a question, like an honest question. Because even something as simple as my tattoos, like a little kid might be like, what is that? You know, if they've never seen a tattoo before. And the parent will often jump in and be like, oh, something that you're never going to have, or like something you're not allowed to have till you're 18. And I'm not allowed to be like, oh, this is like a really pretty form of art that I got, you know, and like, here's how it happens, and like answer any of their questions about it. It's like the parent has this idea that tattoos are bad. So I'm not allowed to like just talk to this person and give them a neutral answer. Right? It's like, it has to be framed as like, that's bad. And then it's like, well, you're also now making me seem bad.
Yeah.
And so you're shaping this kid's ideas about, you know, what is bad and what is good. And it's like such a neutral thing, like a tattoo. It's like, why is that bad? And you're also telling the kid that they can't do stuff to their own body that they want to do because you have expectations about their body. Like parents who are like, you're never going to get a tattoo. I'm just like, what?
Not your body.
Like that. Yeah, it's not your body. And Mexie, I know you know this well, but it's just like, yeah, it's just wild to me, this idea that the level of exposure that people try to prevent their kids from having, to me is very shocking.
Yeah. Because especially for like, I have a ton to say on that, but especially for like young people, like especially like as a young woman, I'm like, don't you want to instill the value in me that tells me that like I am in control of my body and that I get to make the decisions about what happens to my body? And instead you're like, no, you get to make all the decisions with what happens to my body. And if I make a decision you don't like, then you're going to actually comment negatively on my body. Like, what gives you the right to comment negatively on my body? Like, it's not, it's so wild. It's so wild to me.
Very wild. And even stuff like having, you know, a shorter haircut, if a kid wants to ask me about that, it's like this implicit understanding that I can't talk about being genderqueer because somehow that's like too adult and inappropriate for a kid to hear about. But then they can watch, you know, these fucking like tween drama shows where these kids are like making out and like cheating on each other and having breakups and like all of this drama, and everything is so fucking dramatic and like wild. And that's like what they're learning, is that's the dynamic they're supposed to have with their peers, but they can't learn about like other gender identities that may apply to them, you know. It makes me, because I remember with my sisters watching the stuff that they were watching that I had aged out of, and just being so shocked. I'm like, why are you watching like middle schoolers go like, why are children of this age having these like Riverdale-esque, you know, relationships and situations? Like, I don't know. Like at that age for me, I was watching like Pete and Pete like fart on each other, you know, or like stuff on Nickelodeon where like people are getting slimed on. And Anyway, it just like, again, I just think we allow kids to be sexualized and that's so normalized, but then they don't have access to anything else that might help them contextualize what they're seeing on TV, such as learning what comp het is and learning what other sexual and gender identities are, and that those are options that are available to them.
Mm-hmm. And it's just so ridiculous when you think about the fact that like they're learning all this from porn. Like that's what I just can't wrap my head around. That I'm just like, but surely it's like common knowledge for every single parent or every single human in general at the moment that like that kids from like 12 years old, even younger a lot of the time, are watching porn. So surely they should know by now that like if they're not gonna teach them this stuff themselves, or if they're not even allowing these conversations, then the only way they have access to that is through like this pornified way. Then I don't know, it just doesn't make any sense to me. But I think it's that kind of mentality of like, oh well, it's behind closed doors, or we don't need to think about that, it's hidden away. But then that's like the whole mentality that like breeds these kind of problems in the first place, because everyone's like, oh, this sexual violence is like hidden away, it's behind like anything that is like not so visible and like invisibilized and silenced, then it's like we don't need to have a conversation about it. But like I don't know, it's just such a strange manifestation of our culture that we just silence certain like I don't know, that so much is sorry, the cat is distracting me. I don't know if you can hear it, but
I don't know if you saw that comment, but Paul was like, the cat left but the carnage continues, and it just cracked me up so much. It's like the cat is just wreaking chaos. It's like, so not funny. On my watch, bitch. Well, I agree. I think a lot of parents are naive. Like, I think that they know, but they also deny to themselves that their kids are being exposed to this stuff. But it's like, that's what I mean. Like, I tried to watch the Chucky TV show. I have to laugh at myself because I'm like, the shit that I watch.
Like, Nicole, how do you decide? Like, how do you decide what you're going to watch? Because it's always so random.
It is very random. I'm a very eclectic person, but I was watching the Chucky TV show because I was like, oh, Chucky's fun. Like, it's campy fun. And I've been on a horror kick for a while. And I had to stop watching it because it's centered around 13 and 14-year-olds. And they're literally having storylines that are the same as they would in high school. Like, there's the popular rich girl and she's throwing parties somehow by herself in her house as like a 13 or 14-year-old, and like bullying other people just horribly. And then there's this scene that the one that made me like, I can't do this anymore. She's dating this boy, and there's this scene where she gets him up into her bedroom and she's basically like seducing him, and they start making out. And I'm already like, I don't need to see 13-year-olds make out, but like, all right, fine. But then she starts, like, the way that it was filmed is basically made it seem like she wanted to fuck, and she got mad at him for not like making a move. And she like ends up yelling at him and like kicking him out of the room because he was like uncomfortable and didn't know what to do. And I was like, these are fucking tweens. Like, why am I seeing this right now? And I just couldn't handle it. And I'm like, this is supposed to be about a doll that kills people. Why do I have to deal with these shenanigans? Like, why can't these kids be kids, you know? But it's like, everyone's just made so adult. So my point is, like, even if your kid doesn't watch porn, they're going to end up watching something like that with actors shown. And these actors are actually like 14, 15 years old. They are kids. And you're going to see scenes like this where, like, if you're a boy watching this, you're going to think, oh, no, I need to know what to do if I have a girlfriend because she's going to get mad if I don't know what to do, right? And then you're going to, like, look up porn, or you're going to ask your friends and be like, what is this thing I'm supposed to do if a girl is kissing me and we're alone? And that's how this shit starts. And so it's just ridiculous to think like kids aren't going to be exposed in some way to these ideas, because they always will.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point about these young boys and like having all this self-consciousness, because I think it is so tragic that a byproduct of this pedophilic gaze is that men feel like the only access to their sexuality they can have, the only way they can perform sexuality is through this hyper dominant, hyper aggressive, violent like way where they constantly have to be in control and like have to shut away all their emotions, etc. And like that's so tragic. It's so tragic that we're getting young boys to just like hide away like their feelings and hide away their true like sexual expression and like only be able to perform it in one specific way. And yeah, it really is so utterly sad. I'm like so sad for all these young boys that have to like go through that, and then it's so hard for them to then unlearn that later in life. And yeah, it's tragic.
It is tragic.
Yeah.
There were lots of good comments, but I'm done. I think I've said all I need to say.
Yeah, we've been going for a while, so maybe we can.
It's been a long one.
Wrap it up.
Do you have some closing thoughts that you wanted to share, Kathrin?
Not really. I mean,
we're just like, okay, bye.
Yeah.
Well, I can say thanks to everyone who came. First of all, we've been really excited to do this series, and I'm very excited because the next one is mine. I'm taking lead on it to talk about the female gaze and the queer gaze and just alternatives to the male gaze, what they actually are and what they represent, like the ways in which they help to dismantle the male gaze, if that makes sense. So what they look like and also how they work. And that one will be very visual. I'm going to pull clips so that we can actually see some of this stuff in action and compare and contrast to other things that we've talked about. And it's going to be a great time.
Yeah.
I'm so excited for it.
Thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to listen to us. And yeah, it's just really nice that you all join us. And yeah, this has been a really great conversation. And I'd love to hear people's thoughts in the comment section, because we need some comments. We need to get the algorithm to
I feel like this channel is always going to struggle because like we're always talking about stuff that's like blocked on YouTube.
Yeah.
I don't think they're really wanting to pump the pedophilic gaze in the algorithm.
Yeah. Or are they?
Or are they? Yeah, not when we're critiquing it.
Not we're
Yeah.
That's true.
But I wanted to say thank you, Kathrin, for hosting. I think this
thanks
was
so much.
Really great conversation, and I'm really glad that we had it.
Me too.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, I'm really excited for the next one. We can actually talk about something positive, like liberating ourselves.
Yeah.
It's funny, even though we have it's kind of depressing topics, I have such a good time. I'm just laughing so much. But yeah. Anyways, okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.